Hey everyone, I am Rachel Bateman, and today's video is all about what not to write into your screenplay. We have gone over screenplay format and how to write a screenplay, but there are some things that you really need to make sure you are not putting in your screenplay if you want it to go anywhere. And what all these things really boil down to is just doing your job as a writer. You are here to tell the story, to lay it out, but you're not here to act and direct and be a set decorator and a costume and wardrobe person. You're not here as a Foley artist or a director of photography. You are here to tell the story. So all these things that we do not put in our screenplay, that's because there's someone else's job and we need to leave it for that other person to do the job. Screenwriting is a much more collaborative experience than novel writing in that even if you're not collaborating on the actual writing, in order to have a finished product, a movie, there's a huge amount of collaboration and a ton of people involved in making the final product. So you aren't in charge of everything the way you are in a novel. You aren't in charge of describing all the details. You are not in charge of a lot of these things. So I've broken it down into 10 things we leave out of our screenplay in order to write a spec script that shines. If you go online and you search out screenplays to your favorite movies to read, you might notice some or all of these things in those scripts that you're reading. And a big part of that is that often when you download a script from the internet, you are downloading a shooting script. What we are writing is a spec script, and those are two very different things. A spec script is short for speculation, and that is something that you are writing in hopes of someone buying it and producing it and making a movie. You're trying to entice producers and actors and whoever might be reading your script. It is written with the experience of reading it in mind. A shooting script is the guide they are using as they are actually filming the movie, so it'll have a lot of these elements in it in order to keep all the different crews in line and really give a full view of exactly what is happening and what needs to be handled in every scene that they shoot. But we don't need to worry about that because we are writing spec scripts. Another thing to keep in mind is that for almost all the things that I'm going to list here, there will be exceptions to this rule. There are times that for the forward motion of the story, you do need to get a little more specific and you do need to implement one of these things and put it right there in your spec script to make sure that the story moves in the way it is supposed to move. And the other fun thing to know is that for most of these things that we leave out of our spec script, there are ways to imply them and tricks you can use to make sure that things are shot and filmed the way you envision it, even if you don't put the actual direction into the script. Now, with all that out of the way, here are the 10 things you do not include in your spec script. Number 1 is scene numbers. If you're reading a shooting script, you'll notice on either side of the slug line, there'll be a number. They are the same number on each side of the slug line because that is the number of the scene in the movie. That is something that is exclusively for shooting scripts. You do not need to include it in your spec script. It will mark you as an amateur. The number 2 thing not to include in your spec script are camera angles and movements or things like we see, which just really tell you a camera angle or movement. This is the director's job, the DP's job. This is not your job. Now, this can be easily implied. Say we have someone who is going into a room and for some reason, like the doorknob's really important. There's some reason it needs to be close up on the doorknob. Now, you could write in close on doorknob. That is a camera direction. If you only do that once in your screenplay, you'll get away with it. But what you could also do is describe the intricate doorknob as the hand turns on it. And that implies a much tighter focus on the doorknob than just the whole door. Now, you do want to not get overly verbose in doing this because you only have so much room, but that is a quick way to imply a close-up shot. And the level of detail in any scene that you're describing will imply the shot needed. So that is just a quick way around that. Now, every so often, there will be a really legitimate reason why you actually have to have a camera angle in your screenplay in order to convey what you are trying to show. If it's done very sparingly, like once, maybe twice in your screenplay, that's fine. We try to avoid it, but sometimes to get the impact of what you're doing, it can be shown. My favorite example of this comes from the very opening scene of Scream. I reference it a lot because it's one of my favorite screenplays. And the very first line of Scream is fade in on a ringing telephone. And then a hand reaches for it, bringing the receiver up to the face of Casey Becker, a young girl no more than 16. In order to fully get the impact of, okay, this phone and the fact that it's ringing is super important to not just this scene, but the whole rest of the movie. He starts us on the phone and gives us that camera angle. Again, that's something we don't want to be doing a lot because that is not our job. Okay, the number 3 thing you do not want to write into your spec script is too many parentheticals. I went over this a bit in my video about formatting screenplays, but parentheticals are little, obviously parentheses, that drop right below the character's name and dialogue to give a little bit of direction to how the dialogue will be delivered. It can be really easy to want to put a parenthetical on everything so you could have total control of how these words are being said, but again, that's not your job. You have a director and you have actors, and their job is to interpret what you have written so they can take it. If you give your script to an actor in hopes that they'll read it and fall in love and help you get this movie made, putting parentheticals after their name every time they have a bit of dialogue basically is telling them, I think you're too dumb to interpret this in a way that's going to satisfy me. Like, let me just tell you exactly what to do and take away anything that you might interpret and anything that you might actually bring to this character. Don't do that. Trust the actors that they can interpret the script and give a wonderful performance with the words that you've written without having to give them a bunch of extra direction. The number 4 thing you should not write in your spec script is scene transitions. Dissolve to, cut to, smash cut to. We don't need this. This is for editing down the line. Just slug line is the start of a new scene, and you write your scene, and then slug line to a new scene, and you write your scene. Leave the transitions out and let that all be handled later. The 5th thing you do not want to add into your screenplay is very, very detailed character descriptions. When you introduce your character, you have the name, an age or age range, and a very brief description, but that description doesn't get into things like hair color or eye color, or if they have a hook nose, or whatever description you might be thinking of, because that's not your job. Unless it is super, super important that this character have a certain color of hair because that is pertinent to the story. Don't bother with these detailed character descriptions. There are casting directors who do stuff like this. They read your character and they decide who they feel is right for the part. And you don't need to try to describe down to a T what this person looks like. Let that be open for someone else to decide in the future. Now, one thing I will point out as you are writing these brief character descriptions, don't write every female character in your book as pretty with whatever about her, and pretty, and classic beauty, and innocently pretty. Actresses are getting really, really tired of getting scripts where every single female character is described as just pretty. Just generically pretty. Give your female characters the same pizzazz in introduction that you give your male characters. And you don't have to make all of them just generically pretty. You could just leave that out entirely and it'd be okay. The 6th thing you're going to leave out of your screenplay is clothing descriptions. This is the wardrobe and costume department's job. You do not need to describe what each character is wearing when they enter a scene. In a book, you might describe their clothes more just to really kind of set the scene and help us be immersed. In a movie, you don't do that because that's someone's job down the line. Now, there are certain things, obviously, that are very, very pertinent to a character in how they dress, and that is important to add, whether that is a very specific type of thing that they wear, you know, the girl in the red coat in Schindler's List, or just a style that they have. I have a character in Lake Blaine, it's McCartney and Marley's mother, and when she is introduced as being in her late 30s but wearing clothes that are more befitting of her teenage daughters. Now that's a specific character trait that she has, but I didn't need to say she's wearing this name brand shirt and these particular kind of jeans or anything like that. Just a hint as to what kind of clothing this woman might wear because that is part of her character. But typically, unless it really matters for the character, like, you know, Michael Myers' navy blue jumpsuit and his mask, like that's something that obviously is part of his character. Just leave it. Let the costume department figure out. That's their job, not yours. The 7th thing we leave out of our spec script is overly detailed scene descriptions. If we have characters walking into a cafe, we don't have to have them entering the cafe and it's quaint with checkerboard floor and mismatched tables scattered throughout the room and plates hanging on the wall with pictures of kittens frolicking across them. We could just have, it's a country cafe. And that's it. Let the set designer figure out the rest for you. Unless one of those plates is going to be used in self-defense to kill the guy who's trying to kidnap the little girl, we don't need to know that the plates are there at the screenplay level. Let that be something that the set people figure out and they can decorate the cafe as they see fit. The 8th thing you're going to leave out of your spec screenplay is most sound effects. All movies will eventually go to the Foley department and sound effects will be added in, but it's not up to you to describe those and keep those in detail. Every so often you'll have an effect that needs to be included or you really, really want included just to make sure that the impact is there. In my screenplay format video, I read a section of Lake Blaine where McCartney is pushing her way through the brush next to the lake and she steps on a stick and it crack. I included that sound there because it is a sharp sound that McCartney, the character, is going to react to. You could have some sounds like that. But if they go to a football game on a Friday night, you don't need to describe that the crowd is cheering and you could hear the huffing of the team as they run through the entrance to the field and the clap of their helmets as they crash. You don't have to add all of that. They'll add it at the end. The Foley department knows what a football game sounds like. They'll know the kind of sounds they need to add in as they see this film that you have taken, and they'll know what sounds to enhance and what to do. That is not your job to describe every single sound that comes across. The 9th thing you're going to leave out of your spec script is a heavy usage of all caps in your description paragraphs. We talked about this in the screenplay format video, but in your description paragraphs, the first time a character is introduced, their name is in all caps. After that, it is not. Some certain things that you really, really want to draw attention to are all caps, but really you don't want to do that much because it makes it hard to read. And the whole point of your spec script is readability. You want whoever is reading it, whatever producer or actor or director is reading it, to immerse themselves in the story and have the full experience of reading it. And if you're putting in things like all caps all over the place that are going to pull them out of that story and make it harder to read, that's bad news for you. Now, this is one of those things you might really, really notice. If you've downloaded a shooting script, there might be caps all over the place because at the shooting script phase, they're going to caps anything that needs to be brought to the attention of a specific department. So there will be props that are in all caps. Character names, like all the time, are going to be in all caps. Sounds, there's going to be all kinds of caps. It makes it really, really a lot harder to read. But at this point, the point isn't readability, it is making sure that every single thing that needs to be in a scene is accounted for. And so they highlight them with all caps. And the 10th thing you want to make sure you do not add into your spec script is unnecessary costs. You need to be conscious of your budget as you're writing and recognize what things are going to cost more. And sometimes you will need that budget and you will need a certain thing that you've mentioned, but sometimes you just mention it for the atmosphere and it's not necessary. Word Dancer, who has a wonderful channel on screenwriting that she has not updated in a long time, but her videos are still worth checking out and I will link her. She uses a squirrel as her example here, and it's such a great example. I'm just going to go ahead and use it as well. And she talks about, characters go to a park and it's written, they're at the park and a squirrel frolics by. And you don't think much of it because that's just setting the scene until you realize that you need to have a squirrel and you need to make sure that squirrel goes where it's supposed to go. So you need to train a squirrel, like the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory movie with Johnny Depp. They spent like 17 months or something like that training the squirrels. Maybe not that intense, but you're going to need to train the squirrel. You're going to need to have a squirrel handler on board who's in charge of that squirrel. You are going to need to have people who oversee the squirrel to make sure that no animals were harmed in the filming of this movie. It really, really starts to add up. Same thing if there are cows lolling in the background. You have livestock, you're going to need all those things. You're going to need the animal handlers. You're going to need the people who are overseeing and making sure it's okay. There is just a ton of cost involved, which doesn't mean you can never have an animal in your movie. Obviously, there are a lot of great movies that have animals and need animals. But if your animal is not necessary, leave it out. And that goes for pretty much anything. If you have something, some kind of prop or setting that isn't super, super necessary, consider how much it's going to cost to have it there and take it out if you can. Wide open spaces often cost a lot. You wouldn't think that that's the case, but permitting can cost a lot. Monuments and well-known buildings and specific interiors of buildings that are recognizable to people, it's going to add up costs. Having to have the movie take place in a very particular town or state or community, that could add up your costs depending on what licensing is like and how things go. So if you don't have to, for the sake of your story, be that specific about things, go ahead and don't be that specific about things. Keep your cost in mind as you're writing, because it can really impact the saleability of your script. If someone's reading it and it's like, wow, this is really, I'm enjoying this story, but holy cow, like every time I turn the page, the dollar signs, they just add up and up and up, and I could just see the budget skyrocketing. And pretty soon you need a tentpole budget, but this is not a tentpole movie, and that can squash the potential for your movie. So just consider that. I know most of you are novelists who are following me, and many of you, if you are following along and writing a screenplay, you have no desire to do anything with it but learn how to do it, so that doesn't really matter for you as much. But it is definitely something to keep in mind. Alright y'all, those are my 10 things that you do not want to put in your screenplay when you're writing a spec script. Like I said at the beginning, it really just boils down to let other people do their jobs and you do your job as a storyteller. Keep it simple, tell the story, and let everyone else dress it up and do the details down the line. I hope this video is helpful for you. If it is, give it a thumbs up and go ahead and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I am Rachel Bateman, and I will see you back here next time.